Good day, everyone. As people are hopping on, I am so delighted to welcome you to the Chesapeake Foodshed Network's virtual food system webinar series. My name is Yona Sipos, and I direct program development for the Chesapeake Foodshed Network through Local Concepts LLC, a consulting firm providing development and network management support for the CFN. I'm joined today by Christy Gabbard, owner of Local Concepts and CFN Network Manager, Sonia Kiner, CFN Local Concepts Communications Director, and Liz Spellman, CFN Local Concepts Policy Analyst and farmer. In addition, of course, I'm delighted to be joined by our resource experts who will be introduced shortly. We will also be joined today by some portion of the almost 80 registrants from all across the United States, and I really think it's worth mentioning here that we had 28 states and DC represented. So incredible interest across the country for this important topic. Welcome to all. Before our main event, I will provide a brief overview of the CFN and our food system webinars. The mission of the CFN is to catalyze connections and collaborations that help to grow a sustainable, resilient, inclusive, and equitable regional food system in the Chesapeake Bay watershed, and that includes DC, Delaware, Maryland, New York, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and West Virginia. We believe that by catalyzing connections and collaborations, we are better positioned to accelerate change in and across our food system. And we do so by growing connections, getting to know one another, sharing information, knowledge, and experience to build trust and relationships so that over time we may align and ultimately work toward collective impact through action. The CFN has been developing over the last approximately 2.5, almost 3 years, among those out there doing the extraordinary work to advance our food system. If you participate in or support that extraordinary work, as well as our vision, please participate in the CFN. The Chesapeake Foodshed Network is open and free of charge to organizations, businesses, funders, agencies, and other change agents working across the Chesapeake watershed to grow a stronger and more resilient food system. In fact, anyone who supports the vision is invited to participate. Please visit chesapeakefoodshed.net to find out more and sign up. Please also note the usernames and hashtags on the slide footers. Sonia will be live tweeting today, and we would love to see you on Twitter as well as on Facebook, where we are live streaming this event. So our food system programming webinar stream provides a platform to catalyze connections around specific food system topics. We partner with resource experts who provide a quick learning opportunity through the webinar. And then during the webinar and afterwards, we provide opportunities for people to continue to dig in, what we call the next steps, ways to continue the conversation and go deeper around that particular topic. Before we get to our actual topic for today and talking about the food policy program, I'll just spend a moment on a few housekeeping items. On your Zoom control panel at the base of your screen, you should see an option to chat, and so that will be at the bottom of where you are seeing me. You should see a number of options, including the one to chat. If you want to open that up, then you'll see that we'll be pushing some messages out to you that way, and we'll invite you to share with us who is on the call with us today. We'd love to hear your name or see you chat your name, your state, your organization, or your business, where you're calling in from. If that's the case. And you'll also see the option to open up a Q&A box where you are invited to post questions at any time. Liz Spellman will be collecting those questions and will be moderating a Q&A after all the presenters have a chance. Next week, the CFN will send a link to the video recording of the presentation, as well as follow-up resources, contacts, and a post-webinar survey, which we'll also make available during the Q&A. So it's now my pleasure to turn this over to Elizabeth Spellman, the CFN policy analyst, and as I said, a farmer herself. Liz will be collecting your questions and will facilitate the presentations and discussion afterwards. More details on all of this can be found at chesapeakefoodshed.net. Take it away, Liz.
Thank you, Yona. The CFN is hosting this opportunity as part of our policy program, which involves connecting advocates to resources, connecting advocates to each other, and growing a stronger food policy voice in the Chesapeake region. Please join our listserv and feel free to be in touch with me directly if you have questions, ideas, or resources to share. I want to thank Brian, Rochelle, and Sara for sharing their time and thinking with us today. Sara is the grassroots director at the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition. Brian is a member of the Northwest Michigan Food and Farming Network and Program Director at Tamarack Holdings, which is a group of food-related businesses with a community development focus. Rochelle is the Policy Director at the Carolina Farm Stewardship Association. The impetus for this webinar is increasing interest in advocacy by our stakeholder groups and the huge importance of ensuring policies will impact the most are heard. We have some really savvy organizations and coalitions and food policy councils with insight to share, and expect we'll be learning a lot together today. So thank you again. We are thrilled to host such an important discussion, and I'll turn it over to Sara to start us off.
Great, howdy everybody. I'm gonna switch over to my screen here real quick and we'll get started. All right, can everybody see that okay? Looks good on my end.
Looks great, Sara, thank you.
Right on, awesome. Well, hey folks, my name, like Liz says, thanks a lot for the introduction. My name is Sara Hackney. I'm the Grassroots Director at the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition based here in Washington, D.C. Just a little bit about the organization I work for. I'll actually spend a few more minutes talking about some of the under the hood part of NSAC shortly, but just to get us oriented to what's going on. So I work for the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition. We're a DC-based grassroots alliance of just about 120 member organizations and hundreds more partners and allies from all over the country who share a common goal of a more sustainable food and farm future and a common commitment to advancing federal policy change as one way to get there. So that's who we are and what we do. We've been doing advocacy for 30 years. To that end, what I hope to talk about today, I'm going to provide you with just a really brief refresher for anyone who's new to this work or who wants to kind of make sure they're grounding what they're doing in how to do it legally and safely within the confines of the IRS. What is lobbying? What can a nonprofit do? Most importantly, for the short amount of time we have, where can I get more information? From there, I'll give you a little bit of a look, again, kind of behind the scenes, how NSAC does our work. And then I'll close by sharing just a few tips and lessons that we've learned from 30 years of advocacy in really close partnership with and really led by farmers and nonprofit organizations around the country. So that's what's on my list for today. And I hate to start just definitions, but I think it's really good to start here just to make sure we're all starting on the same page. Advocacy versus lobbying. This is something that a lot of our members come to us and say, well, what's the difference? How can I do this? What's going on? To start with the most straightforward way to describe it, think of advocacy as the broader umbrella. Anytime folks are speaking up on issues that affect their lives and the lives of others in their community, and if they're helping to lift up solutions or ideas to help make those issues better, that's advocacy. There's a lot of ways to advocate, and they are not at all lobbying. Let's say, for example, you believe, you really care about local and regional food systems, and you maybe you want to write an op-ed, and it's placed in the local paper, and it talks about how local and regional food systems are great for economic development, and that they're helping improve healthy food access, and they're helping rebuild communities. That's a great example of advocating on an issue. Now, lobbying. When you're tying that advocacy into actions intended to influence legislation, now you're lobbying. So let's say, again, in the op-ed example, after you publish that op-ed, maybe you forward it along to Senator Van Hollen's Senate office, and you say, hey, Senator Van Hollen, I'd love for you to read this. In addition, I would love for you to support increased investment in local and regional food systems in the next Farm Bill. From there, you've gone from advocacy into lobbying. So hopefully that's a helpful sort of distinction and example. Let's get just a little bit more into what lobbying looks like. And I start here with the IRS definition. And I'll say right now, my slides for the next few minutes are really focused towards nonprofit organizations, because those are entities for whom they have to use great care and what they do and how they make sure that they're accountable for their 501c3 charitable status. So just so you know, we're talking primarily right now in a nonprofit context. So the IRS defines lobbying as I just said, activities that attempt to influence specific legislation. Within that, They include two kinds, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on this today, but for your reference, there's direct lobbying. That's directly in communication with a legislator or their staff, referring to specific legislation and expressing a view on it, trying to influence that position. So if you, on behalf of your organization, make a call to your member of Congress, you're doing direct lobbying. If there's also grassroots lobbying. So if instead of you making that call, you're sending, maybe you send an email to your supporters saying, hey folks, local and regional food systems really matter to us, and we know they matter to you too. Why don't you call Senator Van Hollen and ask him to invest in this in the next Farm Bill? At that point, what you're doing is you're asking others to express that view and carry it to that member of Congress. So that's grassroots lobbying. If you want to get more into those, I've got a source there listed for you, and these will be in the notes as well. And we're going to get into some specific examples of what is and is not lobbying in just a minute. Before we get into that, I want to leave you with one really important take home today. If you're a nonprofit, you can lobby. Yes, the IRS is on the record as saying, yes, you can. However, you do need to make sure that what you're doing falls within specified limits. So let's talk about that. Here's some examples, and this is very much not inclusive, but I want to just get you thinking today. If you're a 501c3 nonprofit, here are some examples of the kinds of things that you can 100% legally do. You can ask your member of Congress to support or oppose legislation. You can encourage your supporters to contact their members of Congress about supporting or opposing specific legislation. There's a lot more here. Those are just two examples. Some things you cannot do if you're a nonprofit. You cannot endorse candidates for office. You can also not make campaign contributions. You'll see I've got a source there. I'm going to talk more about this in a minute, but where I would really encourage folks to go if you're thinking, okay, those are helpful. I'd love to see the full list. I have a question about something that's in a gray area, or I'm not sure. Again, I didn't give you the inclusive list because it would take about 5 slides. BoulderAdvocacy.org. Boulder Advocacy is an initiative of the Alliance for Justice. And I'm not a lawyer, but a lot of those folks are. I really want to encourage you, if you're looking for a place to go to understand those rules, what you can and can't do, that's my absolute best resource. We've included a couple links in the follow-ups from this webinar, including a PDF. I'll emphasize their stuff is written for regular people like you and me. You don't need to be a lawyer to read it and to understand it. A couple of good rules of thumb when you think about being a nonprofit and lobbying. First, these are the two that I share with our members most frequently. And the first is your bright line, or your key piece you really want to watch out for, is if anything is related to an election, if it's electoral work, you're getting into a zone where you really need to be talking to experts and making sure that what you're doing falls within IRS guidelines. If you're a nonprofit and you're doing mostly the work that nonprofits often do, networking, community programs, services, you absolutely can engage in lobbying on legislative issues that matter to your work as part of the course of what you do. The homework I'm going to leave you guys with on the technical side of things is to go check out BoulderAdvocacy.org. And in particular, if you've never looked into it, there are kind of 2 key ways that an organization may choose to measure how much lobbying they're doing, called the insubstantial part test and the 501h election. Those sound kind of wonky, but I promise on that website, they're relatively clear. And for context within the INSAC organization, we have organizations who use both of those tools completely comfortably and are able to do a lot of great advocacy and lobbying work and part of improving federal policy. So I'm going to shift gears here and shift a little bit about INSAC, because to give you some examples of what we do and how it may be relevant in your own work when you think about what you want to be doing. So why do we exist? Why is there a DC organization doing lobbying on these issues? Well, INSAC exists because 30 years ago, a number of grassroots farmer-based organizations realized that, if they needed a voice in Washington, D.C. to have their issues heard and to have their needs met on the ground. They pooled their resources together to hire their very first staff member based in DC, kind of to be their eyes and ears and their voice, their direct representative on the Hill. And we've been around ever since. There are others like us. We are by no means the only organization doing this work in Washington at a grassroots level. There's the National Family Farm Coalition, there's the Rural Coalition, there's National Farmers Union, there's a National Organic Coalition. There are many more than I can possibly name, but I want to emphasize that we're by no means the only one. It's kind of a complex and crowded scene here, in fact, in DC. What makes us unique? Why are we here? We like to think it's our relationships to our members and in turn, the farmers and communities they serve. We combine this DC presence with a lot of grassroots action. The photo you see on your screen is me along with an ally organization, and a staff member from an INSAC member organization with a farmer from West Virginia. And what we were doing that day was delivering petition signatures on a really important agricultural competition issue on the Hill. So I love that picture because it's kind of what we do best. Us here in DC working with farmers and members and allies to bring those perspectives and those voices directly to the Capitol. How do we do that? I won't bore you with reading this in depth, but just in essence, everything starts with farmers. They share their experiences, their ideas, their challenges with member groups. Those folks collect that input. They bring it to our shared table at INSAC. Together as a coalition, we try to identify priority issues, we set priorities, we campaign to win. What does this look like from the outside? This is what we hope it looks like. We're unified. We're sharing together in our asks and how we respond to things. Always, 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 it is farmer forward. That means wherever we can, farmers are carrying our message because they believe in it and they share it with us. We're well coordinated. The work happening on the ground is coordinated with the DC team. And really importantly, we're winning. If you think about, I put up a couple acronyms from the broad Farm Bill acronym soup. Those are examples of programs that our coalition has helped to develop and win and champion over the years. Sustainable Ag Research and Education, the SARE program, Beginning Farm Rancher Development Program, Conservation Stewardship Program. Those are just a few examples of the kinds of wins that are possible working together on policy. So the interesting stuff, what's going on under the hood to help us get there and help us get those wins. And again, in the context of, hope this helps you get a sense for what it takes. First and most importantly, and I cannot emphasize this enough, a lot of listening to both farmers and to our members. This is not necessarily straightforward or easy. Real life issues don't often always translate into a neat and tidy policy solution. Rare is it that a farmer is having a challenge and one simple small fix in DC would just make it all better. So often that is not the case. And I think both of our next speakers will have some really great specific examples of this work of listening and really importantly, translating what's the issue and what might be the solution in DC. Is it a legislative issue? Can we fix it in the Farm Bill? Is it an appropriations or a money issue? Or is it implementation? Is it, well, the language looks great, but it's just not working right on the ground? That translation work is huge and very important, and we depend on our members and organizations on the ground to help us do that. Setting shared priorities, not easy. That takes time and effort. Legwork in terms of just making it possible to keep people informed and in the loop. There's a lot going on in DC. We do a lot of hustle, just trying to keep that legwork going, keep our members and their farmers up to date. And the last one I'll mention here, because this is important for us and critical for anyone who's doing this work. Anytime you're talking about advocating with farmers and on farmer issues, trust is absolutely key. We have to be transparent in sharing our intel and our news and our strategy, and we have to be cooperating across issues and actions. So a couple of take homes for you guys. I tried to think about, if one is just getting started in this work or looking for some best practices, where might we try to leave you? And here's just a few, and I'm more than happy to get specific in the Q&A or with follow-ups. The first take home, let me first emphasize, please don't be intimidated by jumping into lobbying and advocacy more broadly. You can do this, you should do this, and we absolutely need you doing this. More voices in this space is a good thing and a helpful thing and a really key thing. Start where you're at. If that is, we've been doing this for a while, we're ready to step it up, awesome. If that is, I'm just getting started, that's cool too. Whether you have 5 minutes or full time, there's a role for you and an opportunity for you. And I know Rochelle will speak more to this notion. You can, the question of, well, do we hire a lobbyist? Do we hire someone in staff? Do we partner with a coalition? Those are all 100% valid options. And those are, questions you should explore for yourself. A couple ways in terms of working with farmers to help, again, ensure trust and make sure that what you're doing is in farmers' interests. It starts with listening. You cannot over-listen. Every opportunity you have, you want to be checking in, asking questions, and limiting your assumptions about what matters and what's needed. I'll emphasize as well the importance of ground truthing. What ground truthing is simply, hey, we think we've got a solution here after talking to folks. The importance of circling back, not just saying, okay, we got it, peace out, but rather, okay, we think we've got a solution. What do you guys think about this? Does this work? And that can be a few times, that can be iterative, that can be a thing that takes a few rounds, especially key with folks who maybe don't have the privilege to be at the table every time. That includes farmers who may be busy. That could include individuals or particular communities impacted by the work who maybe don't have the opportunity to be at the table. Taking that extra step, are we listening to them? Are we asking questions of them? And really importantly, are we making sure that they believe that the solution that we have is a good one? And my last closing thing, because it's time for me to wrap up at 15 minutes, is just want to close. I work in a coalition. To the extent possible, I can tell you firsthand in Washington, when we think about lobbying, when we think about advocating for change, the more we can hang together, the more we can work together and cooperate and coordinate, the better for all of us. And so with that, I will pause here and stop and hand it over to Brian.
Sarah, thank you
Yes.
so much. And just wanted to, Brian, it would be great if you would turn your video on and get the, and start sharing your screen. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry there, took me a second.
There he is.
Let me grab your screen and we should be good to go. All right, let me get, sorry about that. Just a second, please. Get my present. And can everybody see that okay?
Yes, looks great.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. Couple extra seconds there. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Sarah. That was a really great introduction. My name is Brian Bordage, and I am currently the Special Projects Manager for Tamarack Holdings, which, as Liz was so kind to mention, is a group of really local and regional food-related businesses in the greater Northwest Lower Michigan area. And prior to that, worked for 15 years as a farmland program manager for 2 of our regional land conservancies, working directly with farmers on decisions about protecting their land and building relationships with them related to advocacy work for the organizations I worked with and our friends in the state and our friends in Washington, D.C. I'm a founding member of the Northwest Michigan Food and Farming Network. We've been around for a long time and very active, work through a series of task force and continuing to try to mature the way that we're measuring our success, et cetera. So Sarah really set a great stage for talking about working with growers on those issues that are most important to them. I want to talk about the different levels at which that can that kind of engagement can happen, my experience is at the local level, at the state level, and at the federal level. And I've had the fortune of working with growers on issues that relate at all of those levels. And I want to start by first saying that I want to reinforce something that Sara mentioned, and that her organization is really fundamentally all about, and that's about building relationships and garnering trust. And I think it's really important to recognize when you start to work with those folks that are in a farming community or an agrarian community, that that's really vital to any kinds of successes that you might have. And that it's a process. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. You may have the good fortune of being a part of a farm community already, and that's great. But still, it's a process of getting folks to understand what it is that you're interested in, what it is that they're interested in, and how those things might come together, and how you might be able to help them to further those things that matter to them. Other thing I want to say is that it's really important to look at leaders, to look for and find opinion leaders and champions in the farm community. I can't think of an instance where I have been working with growers in our region where there wasn't a couple of different things. One is that they have their own sorts of neighborhoods, if you will. And often these are organized around the kinds of farming activity they're involved in. So in our area, are they a fruit farmer in the microclimate along Lake Michigan, or are they a small farmer doing fresh vegetables and fruits perhaps for farmers markets and direct sales? You know, are they a part of a larger commodity system, what have you? And in each of those kinds of neighborhoods that you begin to identify, you'll certainly identify opinion leaders and those people that that particular group looks to for advice. They look to for their opinions about matters of policy and things like that. The other thing I wanted to talk about in that effort to, or emphasize in that effort to building relationships and garnering trust, is to start where the farmers are. I think a lot of times we want to invite farmers to what we do instead of going to meet farmers where they are. And a great example would be to find out where farmers have coffee. And as you get to know, there's a lot of morning coffee happening in the farm community. So is there a way for you through the people that you meet to get to those conversations? Or is there another place where farmers like to gather periodically or even on a daily basis? And is there a way to engage them at that spot? So those are just some foundational things I wanted to emphasize. I want to talk about a specific local example of the work I was fortunate to be a part of. As part of my job, I worked in Acme Township, just like Wile E. Coyote, and which is on the eastern shore of the Grand Traverse Bay of Lake Michigan, the bottom of what we call the east arm of the Grand Traverse Bay. It's a perfect microclimate along the lakeshore for the production of stone fruits and in particular tart cherries and sweet cherries. Traverse City, where I'm located, is often referred to as the cherry capital of the world. This region is responsible for the production of about 70% of the nation's tart cherries on an annual basis. So this land is important to us for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is that unique microclimate. Acme Township is an area on the edge of Traverse City that was starting to experience significant sprawl. And back in 2004, they passed a local property tax that created funds at the local level to help purchase permanent conservation easements on farmland. And my role at the Conservancy at the time, it was my job to help to administer that program. And I was new to this particular community at the time. One of the things I found out that was very challenging was that there was a lot of contentiousness about the campaign, unlike some of the others in the area or around the country. Not all the farmers were on the same page. We even had still vocal farmer opponents to the program, which was a real challenge. The funds that were raised were significant, but needed significant matching funds in order for us to garner the kinds of success that we wanted. So in managing all of that and in working to try to get to know growers so that we could move things forward, I ultimately figured out that it was in my best interest to figure out what those growers most cared about at the moment and start there. And it turned out that they had a whole lot of concerns about zoning in their township. And some would even couch it under the idea of, why are we raising this tax money to protect farmland when our zoning doesn't even do a good job of taking care of farmers? And so I set forth an exercise that invited farmers during the winter months when they were less busy to get together on a voluntary basis, go through the zoning ordinance with the planner, identify issues that were of concern to them, use the attorney at the township when we needed so, and find those things that they considered unfriendly to farmers in the zoning ordinance. And we produced a white paper that came from that ad hoc committee. We sent it to the Planning Commission through the Planning Commission's farmer representative. And the Planning Commission took it up and they went through it. And the vast majority of the things that they had identified were a lot of antiquated things that were really not beneficial or necessary pieces of the zoning ordinance could be easily changed. And through that process, created a lot of goodwill and a lot of advocates from which to work. So it's just a great example of how to build those relationships with growers that then become more meaningful and allow you to take those kinds of efforts to the next step. One of the things that we're big champions of in both the land trusts I work at, and that certainly I'm a champion of, is holding structured site visits with members of any kind of political body. This is a picture of myself with Dr. Dan Benishek, who was at the time a U.S. congressional representative for our district. And then on the far right, you see Dean Johnson of the Johnson Brothers Farm on the famous Old Mission Peninsula here in our area. And this was organized because we found out that as a new congressman, Mr. Benishek was assigned to the House Ag Committee, and a farm bill was going to be written, to which in the previous slide you might have noticed, my apologies, I didn't point that out, but we have Senator Stabenow standing there visiting a farm. And she was at the time the ranking member of the Senate Ag Committee that was going to be authoring the farm bill. And we thought, geez, this guy's from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, he's a doctor. Like, what does he know about agriculture in our area? You know, how can we make sure that he knows what's going on and what's important? And so I happen to know his staff by having always invited and kept informed our various representative staffs. This fellow came from another person's office to his office. And we found out that he owned and managed forest land. So he understood this idea of working lands in a sense. We invited him to a tour. We partnered with our friends from the state's Michigan Agricultural and Environmental Assurance Program, which is a voluntary environmental compliance program, and that's run through our county's conservation district. and we let the farmers do the talking. So we took him out to make various visits. We picked farmers who we knew had a good way of representing their specific interests. In this case, it was primarily related to conservation issues. And it was an exceptionally enlightening trip for him, and it resulted in some key votes of his at the committee level that supported some things that were really important to all of us. So we go from that level to, you know, other levels, including work with our statewide organization for land trusts. It's called Hard Lake Center for Land Conservation Policy. And the last thing I want to do here is present you with short video about the Saylor farm. Rick Saylor and his family were one of those farmers in Acme Township that I talked to you about. He owned an iconic 6th-generation land grant homestead property. He had a long history, his family had a long history of being big community players in historically. They had granted a park to the township that was the first park in that area on Lake Michigan from a portion of land that they owned. Rick had been through some really terrible ramifications from a sudden death of his father and a lack of good succession planning for his farm, which many of you know is critically important. I ended up working with him for 7 years because of this lien that was stuck on his property. But we ended up ultimately getting his land protected, and he was an extraordinarily shy person. And I want to show you this video because I would have never dreamed when I met him that he would be someone that we would be seeing undertaking that kind of activity. Oops.
That's the last tab on the right.
Thank you. I got my little toolbar on the way. Oops. Did I just go out?
You can hit the video on the far right.
I can't get to it. Oops. Sorry, folks. Just a second here.
You can see the tab, the 6 generations. Tab.
Yeah, I can't see it for some reason. Oh, there it is.
Just click on
There
it.
it is.
Play it from there.
Can you see that now?
Yep,
Yes.
My apologies for that little glitch.
all good.
Okay, here we go.
My name's Rick Saylor. I'm a farmer, cherry farmer, multi-generational. That's what I do. Michigan's shaped like a mitten. We're right about there. Cherries are our primary crop. I just love the fruit for its flavor. It's attractive. It's kind of a fun fruit. 2 of my 4 daughters are currently helping me during cherry harvest. We just have a ball together. This farm has supported 5 generations of families. I'm the 5th generation, the kids are 6th. That's, I think, the biggest thing about a farm is the family roots. And I think the land really pulls the family together. It's not a monetary reward, but it's one of the greatest rewards. It's a lifestyle that I don't want to see go away.
Where else would you want to live than on a cherry farm? This really has taught me a lot growing up.
I've always been proud to grow up on a fruit farm. The character, our values that we hold, being hardworking, dedicated, watching things grow.
It's Mother Nature. You never know what she has in store for you every year. And you just have to have a positive attitude and know that you work together, you'll produce great fruit.
Because of the National Cherry Festival, we get some press that, you know, this is the cherry capital of the world. Well, it is because the area that you can raise cherries is pretty small. If you look at Michigan, the whole west side is great for growing fruit because Lake Michigan tempers the winter season so that they don't get so cold. Cherries have to be near the water. If you get a couple miles to the east of us, you won't see any cherry orchards. Cherries indeed take a long time. You have to really develop a sense of long-term planning. And sometimes the stuff goes wrong. We find a way to work around whatever's thrown at us. It's really easy when farmers have tough times to be tempted to sell a 5-acre piece off for somebody to build a house on. And when that happens, the proceeds from that sale are lost within that generation. That's where you get urban sprawl from. And I did not want to see our farm cut into 5-acre chunks. So I got really involved in farm preservation. If one farm in this area were to be developed, it would basically put all the other farmers out. And so we're gradually building a block or a zone, if you will, that won't be developed. I'm nurturing my family is basically what I'm saying. And future generations that I haven't even met yet, they may choose not to farm. They can do that, or they can lease it to another farmer, but they'll be able to keep the land, keeps it sustainable.
I hope that this means that we can continue on our generations and continue on our fruit farming legacy. We're really passionate about keeping that going.
My dad is the most hardworking man I know, and I get emotional thinking about it because I know just he works tirelessly to be able to continue on this legacy for us. And there's not a word out there that would describe my gratitude for how much he does for our family.
Oops. Oh.
Reflected in the quality of the fish. So if your water is contaminated, you're going to...
Where'd my people go? Stop share.
Thank you so much, Brian. That was a really beautiful video and presentation. And I think we'll just move right on to Rochelle Sparco, please. Welcome. Thank you so much.
Ooh. Hey everybody, Yona, if there's a problem, will you just let me know? I'm assuming everyone can see me and my screen, and I'll just jump right in. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Rochelle Sparco. I am the Policy Director at the Carolina Farm Stewardship Association. We're based in Pittsboro, North Carolina. I want to just thank the Chesapeake Food Shed Network and Sara and Brian and all of you for participating in this webinar today. Thanks for having me. There we go. Quickly, I'm going to just tell you all what or who CFSA is, and then we'll move right into the advocacy work that the organization does. We are a farmer-driven, membership-based nonprofit. We support farming that's good for consumers, good for farmers and farm workers, and good for the land. We work in North and South Carolina, and we've been around for almost 40 years now. Here's our mission right quick, just in case anybody is interested. Let's skip over that. We do a lot here at CFSA. We're engaged not only in policy or advocacy work, we also provide direct services to farmers, to food businesses, and to people across the food supply chain through technical assistance for farmers. We help make sure that farms are able to become certified organic, make sure that they have conservation projects on their farms, help them jump through the GAP certification hurdles. We also run an incubator farm. In addition, we provide education services ranging from conferences for our members and guests, as well as running a few regional farm tours. We also do advocacy work, and that's what we're going to focus on, which is why it's getting bigger. So what exactly is the advocacy work that CFSA does? We work across branches of government, working with both executive branch folks as well as people in the legislature. One of the things that I was asked to think about in making this presentation is why might an organization that works on behalf of farmers be interested in having someone on staff who engages in advocacy work as opposed to either directly relying on farmer members or hiring somebody to serve as a lobbyist for a particular bill or issue. And one of the things that I have found through the years that I've been at CFSA is, were you to hire, for instance, a consultant to do lobbying on behalf of your organization, you have to give them really specific direction. You are working on this particular bill. But who's going to represent your farmers when the rules implementing that bill are being made? Whose ears are going to be open in the halls of the General Assembly as problems arise or opportunities come up for you to advance the interests of the farmers that you work with? And so there definitely are some spaces where it, I think, is really worthwhile to have a staff member who does this work on behalf of your organization. It also means that you're not just going to be working at the legislative branch on a particular bill. It means that you might have someone from your organization meeting with your Department of Commerce, advancing the interests of your members, meeting with your Department of Agriculture, meeting with your Department of Health. There are lots of options, I think, that open up as you have somebody whose full or part-time work on behalf of your members is advocacy. In addition to working at with different branches of government, we also work at different levels. And we're fortunate to have a pretty sizable staff that enables us to do that. We do some work at the federal level, particularly with the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition. Sarah frequently receives emails from me asking for help. We also do a lot of work at the state level, both in Raleigh, North Carolina, and in Columbia, South Carolina. We also do a lot of work at the local level, similar to some of the work that Brian was talking about, meeting with farmers, figuring out what their local level barriers to success might be, and trying to help them identify policy solutions if there are policy solutions. So I talked a little bit about having a lobbyist on staff or an advocacy professional on staff. And I recognize that for a lot of people, hiring a lobbyist, it sounds really shady. And there are a lot of reasons for that, some of which are totally appropriate. And here are some sort of funny and on the nose cartoons about what the public thinks about lobbyists. That being said, I think that having somebody advocating for your farmer members regularly and often in front of members of the General Assembly, up in Congress in DC, at the local level with your folks who make the decisions about zoning, it's really, really important. If you're not showing up or if somebody isn't showing up, nobody's thinking about your people. Nobody's thinking about your farmers. Nobody's thinking about your members if you have members. And it's not out of ill will, it's just that they're busy and they're thinking about things from the perspective that they bring to their work. Sometimes maybe it's ill will, oftentimes it's not. And so in the event that somebody's not there talking to these decision makers, your interests are being left out or forgotten. I wanted to tell a couple of stories relevant to that point. For instance, last year, North Carolina legalized industrial hemp production in the state. And other states that have legalized industrial hemp have published their statutes, published their rules, and I took a look at all of them in preparation for talking with the folks who would be making the rules at the Department of Agriculture to implement that legalization here in North Carolina. And what I discovered was that in a number of other states, in order to appease law enforcement by allowing a plant that looks exactly like marijuana to be grown in their state, they'd authorized no-knock raids on farms that had licenses, essentially allowing sheriffs or police departments to come onto people's farms without any sort of announcement or heads up to the farmer. And one of the things that I thought of as I was reading that is that seems like a really bad idea for North Carolina. Imagine, for instance, that you are a Black farmer who's been on the land for generations and experienced a great deal of discrimination, both with FSA and with your police department and in the school system. You know, how likely is it, if you know that the cops are just going to show up on your farm, that you're even going to apply for a license? And so we were able to get a meeting with the folks that were drafting the rules and explained that we had that concern, and it just never even came up. Maybe it never would have, but I like to think that at least by flagging that for them, it made them think of something that they might not otherwise have thought of. In another example, I was meeting with the chair of the House Agriculture Committee in Raleigh, North Carolina, and we were talking about some changes to agritourism law in the state. And I was explaining the impact that those changes would have on our members. And he sort of paused in the middle of our conversation and said to me, you know, when I first got elected, I thought that I wouldn't talk to lobbyists. I didn't want to hear from them. I thought they were bad people. And he said, you know, I really appreciate you all now that I've been here for a bunch of years. I realize now that I don't have time to understand the ramifications from all of the perspectives of the laws that we're passing. And it helps me to know what I'm doing when I talk to you all. So I think that that's a really good point that goes toward, you know, if you're not there talking to the decision makers, they're not thinking about you or your members. That being said, there are definitely pros and cons to having staff, full-time or part-time, who do advocacy for your organization. Just want to kind of quickly walk through some of those to get you thinking about whether it may be appropriate for your organization or not. First, we'll cover some pros. You can work on more stuff when you have someone on staff than if you are hiring either a lobbyist just to work on a particular bill or a couple of bills, or if you're relying on farmers to carry the message themselves. They've got other things to do, and we'll talk more about that in a second. Hiring someone, having someone on staff also enables you to go beyond work at the State House or General Assembly. Again, you would be able to work more with administrative agencies on their implementation or their funding decisions. Having someone on staff also ensures that you'll be building some relationships, whether that's with environmental organizations, public health groups, food banks, or other organizations working on food insecurity. Your paid lobbyist isn't going to do that, generally speaking, for you, and farmers don't have time. You'll also likely hire someone who's passionately committed to the work that you're doing, which enables them or encourages them to keep their eyes and ears open about what's going on. There are also absolutely cons. Someone on your staff is probably going to have less access to legislators and to administrative employees, just because they'll probably be someone who's unknown or not well known. And one of the pros, certainly, of hiring a contract lobbyist is that you're basically buying their relationships with legislators or with folks in an administrative agency to enable you to get what you want. Another con is it can take a lot of work to figure out who decides what policies your organization works on. Instead of just picking one or two bills or one or two administrative issues, you're going to be thinking more broadly if you're hiring someone on staff, and that takes a lot of upfront investment of time and energy. And you'll need to do that upfront work to figure out how broad a set of issues do you work on, or how deep, both. There are also pros and cons for farmers when you do this as an agricultural advocacy organization. I think that of benefit to farmers, and I've heard answers like this from our growers when we bring them with us to do in-district meetings with members of Congress, or when we have them down for a lobby day in Raleigh, is it's great that I can be here this one time, but you can be here all the time when I can't. They have a business to run, and they can't always be there, even if they know way in advance when the Board of Agriculture meeting is or when a hearing on a particular bill is. They just can't make it. Sometimes things happen fast or happen suddenly. And even if farmers care passionately about what is happening fast or suddenly, they can't drop everything and get there. You know, we've texted back and forth with farmers who were really anxious to come down to Raleigh and talk with legislators and the governor about a particular issue, but it started raining and the cows wouldn't go in the barn. And so we had to go ahead without her. You can also provide benefit to farmers because maybe you'll be there when you go with them on an in-district meeting and they'll learn, like, hey, this isn't hard. And maybe they wouldn't have done it if you hadn't been there to sort of help them through that experience. Now they realize, oh, I can talk to my member of Congress. It's not scary. They're actually kind of nice to me. So you're building their advocacy skills, their advocacy techniques, enabling them to do more in the future, even if you're not there. I also like this one a lot. You're more likely to have a success that you can report to your members, that your staff can feel good about, that will actually help the agricultural scene in your community if you're working on more than 1 or 2 issues. It's really easy to lose a bill. You know, if that's the one thing you're working on is trying to pass one bill and you don't get it, that's it, and you're done until next session. If you're working more broadly with administrative agencies, working on more than one bill, working on some appropriations issues, you're gonna have a win in there somewhere that's gonna galvanize your membership, that's gonna galvanize your staff and help everybody feel like you're making a difference and actually making a difference. There are some potential harms to farmers too. And on the flip side of the little quote that was sort of a conglomeration of a bunch of things we've heard from different farmers, this one kind of is too. You know, you can't hear what I need. Farmers are not a monolith. You know, our membership ranges from folks who don't believe that climate change is caused by human beings to people who think that that's the most important issue that we could be working on. And the same goes for myriad other issues that we want to or do engage in. And so when you pick a policy position as an organization, you're shutting some of your members out. And figuring out how to do that, I think, is really important, and recognizing that you can't carry every single individual farmer's voice, and what are you going to do about it is also important. By getting involved, you know, these second 2 bullet points are kind of related. You may have some gatekeeping effect. You almost certainly will have some gatekeeping effect on what gets worked on and what doesn't. You know, you're going to decide on some things and leave out others. And oftentimes the ones that you leave out will be the most contentious ones because your membership is split. And so we may never take up a huge banner about climate change because we would alienate so many of our folks. And you may undermine some farmer-led organizing efforts by making those choices. You know, that farmers in your network will feel like, oh, well, if they're not working on it, nobody's going to hear me. And that may not actually be the issue. So there's some quick thoughts and my contact information if anybody has questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rochelle. And thank you, Brian and Sarah. Those are some really wonderful and thought-provoking presentations. So I wanted to dive in with a few questions that have been coming through. And to start off, there is a question about some tactics for balancing grassroots involvement and the grassroots voice and paid staff. So I know that has been addressed a bit in your presentations, but if you all wanted to share a little bit, and you can put on your videos and unmute yourselves and respond a little bit to that question.
Well, go ahead, Brian.
I was just going to say, you know, we, in the land trust world, we do a lot of work through our statewide organization, who are really our paid representatives, if you will, for our community. But they have a different kind of capacity to present a more, let me say it the other way. We have a different kind of capacity at the local organizational level to provide a more grassroots message with specific growers than they tend to have unless we provide it to them. So there are, you know, some sort of strategic divisions of labor, if you will, that I think are important to make those systems work. And I'm sure that Rochelle would agree, you know, with a paid lobbyist, for example, in-house, that's the same kind of issue.
Great. Sarah, did you have anything to add?
I think the only thing I would add is that, I mean, it's a both, the work is most effective with a both and approach, and sort of, we, organizations doing both really, it's great if you have the ability to have paid staff or paid representation, but that work is only really effective when it's done in hand and with the also with really, really great grassroots work. Like, we could not be effective if we were just doing direct work. And so the best work is a both and that's the more complicated piece, because it's got to have good coordination and good communication, but it's both and for organizations to work from their strengths. Where are your relationships? Where can you start?
Yeah, thank you. A question just came in. The bigger picture question here is how to accurately represent the needs of farmers when in fact farmers are a diverse group. And then specifically, how do you approach advocacy on farmer interests in relation to mega agribusiness? And if you need some time to think, that's fine too.
Well, I can start off and say there are, I don't think, really right answers here that will apply across the country and across communities. Every organization, and this is, I think, where some of that really intense legwork comes in by an organization as far as navigating the diverse interests of farmers. You can be really upfront about your mission, and hopefully your members agree with you across the board, and that makes your life really easy. But for us, and I would imagine for most organizations, because farmers are not monolithic, that's not going to be the case. And there are a variety of ways to figure out how you want to deal with it. And many of those will come down, honestly, to funding and time. Do you have time to travel around your service area and hold focus group meetings at times when farmers are available and ask them? And do you have the capacity to hire somebody, or do you have someone on staff who's a trained facilitator who can help root out what are the things that are common between us that we can work on without alienating a lot of people? Are there things where you disagree, but your strength of preference when you disagree with something, you don't care as much about disagreeing with that thing as you do about agreeing with something else? And so maybe you can kind of tease out a platform, a policy platform for your organization that, while it won't be what everybody wants, maybe doesn't force folks to feel like they can't participate anymore. If you don't have the time and capacity for that, can you run a survey? Will your farmers respond to it? Does it need to be a paper survey? How do you design the questions? Is there a small focus group that you could run that could help you figure out what sorts of things in your community you should be asking? And we're sort of leaning toward that latter one. We tried really hard to figure out funding to bring somebody in that could really conduct in-depth focus groups across both states, and it's just really too expensive for us. So we're making that decision right now about a revised policy platform for the Carolina Farm Stewardship Association. I think maybe, can we have other folks weigh in on that first before I talk about the agribusiness thing? Because Lord, I could talk about it for 3 hours. I won't.
I'm happy to weigh in. In fact, it's a very timely question relative to our network, because we're about to engage in a process which we've done in the past, particularly in advance of development of a farm bill, which is really to collect the policy platforms of our friends and family, if you will, starting with organizations like NSAC and American Farmland Trust and others, but also including our state farm bureau's policy that's in development right now, et cetera. And what we tend to do as a network is not to take issue with those things that we don't have consensus about, but rather to reinforce those things that we do have consensus about. And I think that's one of the strengths that we're seeing of the further development of region and local networks or policy councils, is that they have the ability to mine the specific interests of the growers in their area, because we've seen, that there's such incredible diversity that, you know, and then that's acutely something that we're aware of, being located in the West Michigan Fruit Belt, which is a nationally identified unique farmland resource, but also a nationally identified threatened resource in American Farmlands Trust Farming on the Edge studies. So, you know, we have reasons to focus on a specific area and on specific issues, but I guess the gist of what I'm saying is that sometimes the best you can do is to work from consensus and follow the lead of those trusted organizations that you're already involved with.
Did you have anything to add, Sarah, or should we address the specifics with Rochelle?
I think that those are all great top lines. I guess the only thing I'll add is we are no strangers to difference of opinion. We have 120 members representing farmer interests from all over the country. Like, I think a couple of just top lines for me are, one, it is part of the work, so don't expect it to be conflict free. There absolutely will be differences of opinion, and what we look for in our coalition is kind of like Brian mentioned. Where do we have consensus? And that's where we look to try to work together. And if we can't agree, we can try, right? We can go through, we have, you know, conversations, listening sessions, all the pieces that, you know, that Rochelle was talking about. How do you listen and identify that? And then if we really truly cannot find shared common ground in working together, we can also choose not to take a position, and we can choose to step back and let folks, you know, work with other partners or work in other ways on that issue. You know, we try to focus where we do have consensus and where we can have shared asks. But it's hard.
And my follow-up to that would just be, that's why we look to people like, you know, NSAC and AFT and others, is because they've already been doing an incredible job of trying to vet consensus amongst a vast network of members. And so by the time we see their policy platform, we know that that's already gone through an incredible process of negotiation, if you will, over policy priorities. So if we follow that lead, then, you know, we're more likely to be in concert with those folks that we feel share the same fundamental values that we do.
So I think the next question was about dealing with policy advocacy in a context where there are strong agribusiness interests.
Right.
That
or
is
at least in relation to that being, yeah.
Here, we definitely, particularly with hogs in North Carolina, especially. There are some pretty entrenched, well-funded interests that are often at odds with the policy positions that an organization like CFSA does take. And it's hard. It is one of the hardest things about my job, is thinking about how to navigate dealing with the Pork Council and to some extent with Farm Bureau here, who is closely allied with the Pork Council. Pork here is big business, really, really big business. And the members of our General Assembly know it, as do folks in administrative agencies. I will say that 4 years in, there are times when we go toe-to-toe with them, because what they're doing is something that we feel is so wrong that we cannot be true to ourselves as an organization and stay silent. And when we do that, we know how much it costs us. It costs us the ability to go and meet with certain state legislators. It can cost us in terms of relationships that are sometimes good, but always a little tenuous with Farm Bureau. You know, we lose power when we go toe-to-toe with them and we don't expect to win. We just don't have the money, the resources, the media machine, you know, the passionate dedication of a few farmers that will show up and really be the voice in the way that the Pork Council does. And so given that, there are times when we don't like what they're pushing in terms of legislation and we don't step up. Sometimes what it can mean for us when we don't step up and take a public position because the cost is so high, we know we can't win, and the issue isn't obviously our farmers' issue, although it is obviously a big food systems wide issue. We may work with folks that are going toe-to-toe with them on a particular policy issue, often environmental groups who can never get a visit with a legislator in Raleigh anyway, and try to connect them with our members who do passionately care about that piece of legislation, so that we can kind of connect that farmer voice with the folks that are taking a public stance. It just really stinks, in all honesty. Like, I would love to take a position all the time on the things that are happening here that are just wrong, but then we can't walk in and talk about agritourism and get what our members need. And we can't walk in and talk about food safety and farm to school and get what our members need, because we've burned up too much political capital on an issue that we wish had never come up, but you know, it does. I don't know, that's not a great answer, but I think weighing the needs of your members, the ability of your organization to burn through some political capital, and the ultimate effect that you're likely to have, and how much that particular policy affects your farmers, are all things to take into account as you think about it.
Yeah, there's no really easy answer here. So thanks for bringing up some important points related to everything. I found too, sometimes the bipartisan nature of agriculture, just generally, not in the specifics of organic or not, can sometimes help to make some environmental issues that are related to sustainable ag more appealing in some states, because it can sort of be tacked on to some sort of agricultural platform. Just an aside. There were some questions about money that have come through. So one is about, do you ever offer stipends for farmers or financial support for them to participate? And then if we have time, we might try to get to some ideas for funding sources to support policy and advocacy work for nonprofits and food policy councils.
Great. I can maybe speak very briefly to that and then hand it off, because I know it's also a value at the grassroots level. But just a couple of quick things from an INSAC perspective. First is, anytime we're working with farmers, we absolutely do try to support their participation. We just had a fly-in last week with about 20 farmers in DC from all over the country. And they pay no costs, so we do cover and respect their time, and part of our respecting their time is making sure that they're not out of pocket for their time and their energy advocating with us. So that's one piece. In terms of funding this work on your own at an organizational level, one key thing to know is you cannot use federal funding for lobbying efforts, so that's a good thing if you've got federal grant dollars. Those cannot be used in this way. However, it's a really great conversation to have with foundation funders that you have, and that doesn't have to mean grant funding that is entirely advocacy driven, but rather, hey, if we're doing, say, beginning farmer training work, and we have a local funder, maybe part of it, maybe you can build in it with your funders, with the funder saying, okay, a little bit of funding to have a farmer lobby day on the value or the need for beginning farmer support. So we encourage our members to always start that conversation with whoever's funding your work, ask them what their policy is on funding advocacy, and encourage them to allow you to build it in, whether it's a small piece or a large piece, to help you start.
Great. Well, we're almost at time, but if you all have one more comment, we've got a few seconds for that. And if not, I'll close us out. Thank you all so much for your interest, participants, and for joining us. And a special thanks to Rochelle, Brian, and Sarah for sharing your time and expertise with us. We really, really appreciate it. This was a really valuable discussion. We'll follow up early next week with the recording, PDF of the slides, follow-up resources, and a post-webinar survey. We value your input and feedback on this webinar and for the broader context of our policy programming. So please do take a few minutes to fill out the survey if possible. Please visit our website, chesapeakefoodshed.net, for more information and to register for upcoming events. We hope you can join us. Have a great day, and thank you all so much.